The greatest secret with Chinese internal arts is knowing how to practice. For Chinese internal arts, including martial arts, the internal arts like Neigong, and internal alchemy, knowing how to practice was often kept close to the chest. It was only shown to close indoor disciples. It was not shared publicly. It was proprietary knowledge of the various lineages. And what I mean about knowing how to practice is techniques, methods, and principles were often shared widely. So example, you go to a Tai Chi teacher, as a normal student, you might learn the form, learn push hands and techniques. So you could learn how to use martial techniques, how to apply what you're learning from the form. You would learn principles, all that. But knowing how to train, how to put it all together to develop real gong or skill, right, was often not shared, or it was only shared with close disciples. And that's just how it was. And with internal alchemy in our lineage, the Dragon Gate lineage passed on by Master Wang, before that was true as well. Now, my teacher, Wang and myself, and people within this lineage were sharing how to train. I think that the time for secrets is past. I think this stuff just needs to be shared. And how to train, how do we take these different techniques, like Dantian activation or body pore breathing or learning how to enter stillness, and how do we apply those to get things done? How do we actually put everything together to get results? And that's what I mean by knowing how to train. Now, I found that the way I teach in my online courses and in my books is using the guided instructions that I've learned from my teacher. And the guided instructions are very structured in how we put everything together. Another thing that can help is understanding benchmarks. So benchmarks are signposts along the way that tell us where we're at in terms of the practice and in cultivation as well. So they are things that will happen in our practice that will let us know where we're at and where we then need to go, what we need to focus on next. So if how to train can often be thought of as a sequence. Unfortunately, that sequence that is complex because each of us is different. And so although there is a general ladder or stairway to get to the top, each of us, knowing when to progress from one stair to the next, will change because each of us are different. Our karma is different and the bodies we have are different. And so what we'll need to do might be different for different kinds of people, right? So for example, one student may need to just learn how to still their mind, get out of their head, get into their body before they can do anything else. Another person might already have that figured out, and maybe they just need to move, right? Work on their body first. So body or mind, which comes first? It depends on the student and where they're at in general, right? So benchmarks can help us in understanding where we're at and what to apply next. So in this talk, what I want to do is go through 4 or 5 benchmarks for internal alchemy. So this is not for internal arts in general. This is for Neidan, for the way of the golden elixir. These are specific techniques, specific methods that we use to accomplish specific goals. So not all Neigong is equal. It's depending what results you want. What are your goals with it? So for us in the Longmen Pai, it's a spiritual thing. So we're interested in spiritual ascendance, in transforming the body and coarser energies into more rarefied and pure forms of energy. It's a spiritual thing. And so internal alchemy for us is any techniques or methods that we use to either form the elixir or the sacred embryo. Yeah, just always good to define our terms. So these benchmarks may or may not apply to other forms of internal arts or internal martial arts. I don't know, right? But if you're interested in what we're doing, let's get into it. So for internal alchemy, one of the first benchmarks is stillness. So stillness is the foundation upon which the alchemical project rests. We need stillness. Without stillness, the great work cannot be accomplished. It just won't happen. You can do all the fancy techniques you want, but stillness is how we bathe and cleanse the elixir and the embryo, allowing the elixir to crystallize and the embryo to be given birth. Knowing how to apply the bathing and cleansing is part of how we train. And so stillness is a big part of that. So we need to understand stillness and whether or not we are still, right? So what is stillness and how do we gain it? So I'm talking, stillness is a multifaceted topic. Let's talk about 心境. So 心境 is the heart mind and the center. This is stillness when our random thoughts, the 杂念, subside. The more and more those random thoughts subside, we begin entering a state of 心境. And we know we are in a state of 心境. The benchmark is if we can hear our heartbeat, right? So during a session, we don't always need to hear our heartbeat. However, if we want to know if we're still or not, just tune into your heart. Can you hear your heartbeat? Can you feel it, first of all? And then can you hear it? If you can, then you have achieved 心境. So that means you've achieved the first benchmark of stillness. That's great. Whether or not how long you can hold that stillness is another matter. But just being able to, even brief moments of stillness can do wonders for health and well-being, right? So benchmark number 1, stillness. The second one I'm going to talk about is stability. So in Chinese, it's called ding, xin ding. So ding means to be stable or enter a state of stability. And we could have a whole talk just about this concept and approach it from how the Taoist does and how the Buddhists do and whatnot. But for now, let's just keep it really basic. Stability is our ability to keep our attention and our body from moving. So there's a stability that happens. We gain a very solid equilibrium within the body. The spine is straight. The body is relaxed and stable. The mind is stable. It's not running around thinking about things. But more importantly for us as alchemists, the Shen Yi. So the Shen is our spirit. It's a form of energy associated with our conscious mind. And Yi, you could translate that as attention or awareness here. So those two things aren't bouncing around a lot, right? So maybe we have the stillness, the random thoughts have dissolved. Or aren't coming up as much. And you might still have a little bit. But now our Shen and our Yi is very still and stable. And that's a sense of our attention on the body is in one spot. It doesn't waver too much. Then we've started to enter a level of stability. Another way we can look at stability is the length of our sitting sessions. So for our lineage, we do internal alchemy and cross-legged sitting. This allows us to go very deep into the practice. For beginners, we can start with Jian Zhuang, the standing practices, and that's very good for developing qi and learning how to sync and finding structure. But for deeper sessions, especially long sessions of many hours, sitting is the way to go for us. And so if we can sit for 2 to 3 hours without moving, 4 is even better, then we've attained stability, right? So the body doesn't move. When the body doesn't move, the Shen and Yi is also still and stable. And then the discursive thinking is also settled, right? So stability, it's not, the benchmark is not as clear as listen to the heart, right? But we can look at a benchmark of, can we sit cross-legged for, let's say, 2 hours? And during that time, is our Shen and Yi, does it move around, bounce around a lot? Yeah, so that's number 2, stability. So 3, location of Shen and Yi. So if you're not sure what Shen and Yi is, we can just talk about awareness. Keep it simple. Now, location. When you practice, where is the location of your awareness? Are you aware of the room you're in? First of all, when you have random thoughts, you think about people, place, or thing, your Shen will go there, right? So if you're in your training space and you're thinking about your work environment, your Shen has popped out and left the building to your office where you work. Or you're thinking about your mother, your Shen is now with your mom, right? So we want to be aware of where our Shen and Yi, where awareness goes during a session. So there are different benchmarks we can look at in terms of that. One is outside of the room, so that's you're gone, and not in a good sense, as in terms of spirit travel, right? That's your Shen Chu and Chu Shen are these different words we have. One is your Shen has gone without you controlling it to go. And the other one is when we use spirit travel and we are consciously projecting our Shen outside of the room. So those are 2 different things. So for right now, maybe the Shen, the awareness, is inside the room. That's a step up from being outside the room, right? Now we're inside the room. We're in the building. We're in the arena, right? And so that's a benchmark. Another benchmark would be on the body, on the outside of the body. So being aware of our physical casing, the Waike. And that's great. If you can maintain your awareness on the outside of the body, that's a higher level of practice than just keeping it in the room, right? So we have these benchmarks. And then another benchmark would be inside the body. And now for internal alchemy, now we're starting to get somewhere. If we can first figure out how to get our awareness inside the body, which we do through practice and applying techniques, and then maintaining the awareness inside the body, and preferably inside the inner torso. Initially, the head is quite easy, but getting it down inside the torso, the chest cavity, and the further down we go inside the torso, the more challenging it can be, and down into the lower abdominal cavity. And so being aware of, is the awareness inside the torso? And if it is inside the torso, where inside the torso? Yeah. And so in this, and so for this benchmark, it's a very useful benchmark. For internal alchemy, we want to be inside the torso. We want to be inside the internal landscape of the body for longer and longer periods of time. Now, if you've never been inside your body, this is not just a poetic turn of phrase. It actually feels like you are inside the body. When we use inner seeing and inner hearing, we're looking inside the body and we're hearing inside the body. And so our sensory array is now inside the body. And our sense of perception, where we're seeing things from, will shift. The first time this happened for me, it was quite startling. I was on retreat with Master Wang, and I had a experience for the first time of being inside the body, but inside the internal torso, looking out. So I could look up and see the darkness of the lungs overhead, and I could look out through the abdomen and see stuff out. You could have a sense of being able to see light outside of the abdomen. It was very interesting. Another time on retreat with Master Wang, it was a group of 30 of us, and he had all of us actually separately on our own take a piece of paper and some felts and crayons and actually draw what we saw during the session. We were working on a practice called the internal cavity, the 内腔, and to actually draw what we saw when we were in the session. And when you're practicing, it's very tricky to know what other people are experiencing. You know, I don't really know sometimes when I'm with a group of people what's going on in the people next to me, right? And so by doing this, it allowed us to be able to see what's going on. Now, the interesting thing is what we were drawing was very, very similar. Now, there's some definite differences, but let's talk about similarities first. Similarities, all of us drew a space that we're looking down upon. Right, so we're up here looking down on this cylindrical, like almost like an inside of a vase. And the Buddhists call this the heavenly vase, the inner cavity, the tianping. And so it's like looking inside. But the interesting thing was, there was an environment, there was a landscape that we were looking down. So the first thing that was interesting that all of us shared was this round space that we're all looking down at. And then the second thing was that there was a landscape happening there. So for some people, they draw like mountains. Some people had different colors, even fire, all sorts of really interesting phenomena that happened inside this space. And then Master Wang would interpret what that person was happening for that person depending on what they were drawing, right? So some people it was really swampy, it was various phenomena. But the similarities and what I would consider a benchmark is you're not just inside the body feeling sensation-wise, but you're experiencing the body through your senses from within. So that's another benchmark, right? So we have these benchmarks for location. This is the third benchmark I'm talking about here, is understanding where our awareness is, location of Shen and Yi, right? So it's outside the room, inside the room, on the body, and then inside the torso to varying degrees inside the torso. And generally that's from the head down to the chest and into the abdomen. With the caveat that for beginners, it's easier to go into the lower abdominal space from the outside of the body because you don't have the rib cage to deal with. Because rib cage is tough to get the awareness into. So that's a slight caveat there. But so there's a difference between just being able to be inside the lower abdominal cavity and then being inside the whole inner torso, going straight down to the bottom, which would be the gate of life and death, the Huiyin area, the perineum at the very bottom. That's the lowest part of the body when we're sitting, right? So great benchmarks there. So ask yourself, if you're a practitioner of internal alchemy, where are you on that scale? What can you experience? And don't be hard on yourself. Where you're at's where you're at. That's great. And just understanding where we're at and being truthful with that and sincere, then we can know, okay, I've never experienced that. I'm here, now I need to get there. What methods, techniques can I apply to do that, and how can I get there, right? So that's number 3 benchmark, and there's a couple sub benchmarks for 3. And then the next major benchmark for practice is movement of qi. So any sort of movement inside the body. So when we feel energy for the first time, it's generally some form of movement. It can also be other sensations like heat and cold and fullness, tingling, bubbling, but usually some sort of movement. And bubbling I include in terms of movement. Tingling is movement. Vibration, humming, all that is all movement. And when we practice internal alchemy, when we're doing the zhuji gong, which is the laying the foundation, building foundation, the final point for building foundation is a suite of methods we call the yin xian methods the yin xian fa. And there's 12 of these methods which we apply for building foundation. And what we're trying to do with that is, in a nutshell, get a substance, right? If we don't have a substance, we can't do internal alchemy. So internal alchemy is a more advanced practice. So internal alchemy, when we're actually doing internal alchemy, we already have qi. I mean, all of us have qi, but we all have we can feel and work with our qi. So we have an embodied sense of energy, and that is a substance. It's an energetic substance in the body that we can begin working with. Building foundation with yin xian methods and building foundation is how to accumulate enough of this qi, so enough of this substance that we can begin the great work. Right, so we want to have enough, at this point, mainly jing and qi, so we can begin working with it. So movement of qi is another massive benchmark. And I think for my students, when I'm teaching, and for myself, my own practice, when I got to that point where I could feel energetic movement inside the torso, inside the lower abdominal cavity, it's like, that's great. Now we got something to work with, right? Now we can really start doing something here. And so we need to apply those methods to be able to get to that point. Now there are different locations for movement of qi, and these are different benchmarks. So just like benchmark number 3, location of the awareness, a benchmark number 4 also has various benchmarks within it. So for example, often students, myself included, when I first started, will feel qi on the hands and arms. You'll feel tingling, right? Or you may feel some tingling or shivers up the spine as we're practicing the various qigong practices, or standing practice, moving practice, tai chi chuan, whatever it is, right? And that's great. That's movement of qi. Great, good for you. Good for us. But it's a fairly superficial experience, and for internal alchemy, it doesn't really count. It's a good starting point. What we want is we want to feel movement inside the torso, specifically the lower field in the middle of the lower abdominal cavity. Within the lower abdominal cavity is fine too, because then we can use different techniques to activate the lower dantian and get it into the right spot, right? So movement, that means we have a substance, that's a definite benchmark. And I think for a lot of my students, that's, that's something we're working towards. In a recent retreat I ran, we worked a lot on activating the lower field, the lower dantian, and getting that movement, trying to tune into that movement, using our shen, our awareness, dropping it down in the body and getting that movement. The other thing to bear in mind with benchmarks for movement of qi is there are benchmarks for different kinds of qi. So, and there's jing and qi and shen. And then there is what we call hou tian and xian tian. These are technical Chinese terms, and basically they mean post-heaven and pre-heaven, or postnatal, prenatal. There's different ways you can translate that and work with the ideas, but basically there is just there's different kinds of qi that we're working with, and so depending on the sensation you have, that'll give you the benchmark, the signpost is, I'm working on this kind of qi, okay, as opposed to another sensation which would be, that's another kind of qi. Right, so one we use a lot in our lineage is the difference between movement of qi that is irregular, it's not patterned, so it's just fairly random bubbles and shivers and stuff like that, and then a more patterned, regular movement, like a hum or a regular oscillation of some sort, right? So those are two very different kinds of qi. And generally start with the irregular and move towards the regulated pattern. And that's the regulated pattern is the xiantian, that's the pre-heaven original qi that is really great for internal alchemy. So there's another benchmark. If you do feel movement of qi, that you can ask yourself, is it patterned or not, right? So again, another benchmark. And then we can figure out, oh, okay, well, if I want to have the pattern stuff, how do I go about getting that? What methods and techniques do I then need to apply to get that to happen, right? Again, so these are how the benchmarks can inform our practice and help us navigate our way through the alchemical landscape. Okay, so there's a bunch of benchmarks. We have the four main benchmarks. So stillness, right? Can you hear your heart? Stability. Can you sit for a long time without moving? And then can your awareness on the body, does it bounce around a lot, right? Or is it fairly unified in one spot? So stability. 3 is location of your awareness, or location of shen yi. Right? Is it outside the room, in the room, outside of body, or inside the body? And if it's inside the body, where inside the body? Just by figuring out where we have our attention will tell us a lot about where we're at and where we need to go. Okay, so that's 3. And then the 4th one is movement of qi, right? So you have the substance. We need a substance to do the alchemical work. If we don't have the substance, then we need to lay more foundation, do the foundation practices. Until we can experience the movement of the substance. And then what kind of substance is it? Depending on what kind of movement, we can understand what kind of substance. Now there's many more benchmarks as we progress in our practice, but a 5th one I'm going to throw in, this is like the bonus benchmark, is Shen Guang, is light of our spirit. So at some point we may see some light. With our eyes closed, in a dark room, there may be some sort of light that begins to appear. This is called the Shen Guang, and this is another benchmark for practice. This is another really great benchmark. It means our practice has now reached another level. And then we can kind of look at the light, and there's a number of benchmarks for the Shen light in terms of how dense is it, how bright is it, where is it, can we get it inside the body or not? Like some of us will see it outside, it'll often appear outside, but then we need to use certain, and once we have that, then we need to definitely start working with celestial eye practice to be able to bring that light inside, because this is the outer medicine for internal alchemy. So we use this in internal alchemy to supercharge the elixir. So we bring that inside, fuse it with the elixir, and then how far down can you bring the light inside the body? Again, another benchmark. And then how bright inside is your internal landscape when you practice. Because you'll find if you practice in a dark room with eyes closed, the way we do, you'll find that the body may start to brighten up. And that's another benchmark. There's another benchmark with the transformation of, this is a second bonus benchmark, the transformation of qi, the qi hua. So we refine jing into qi, refine qi into shen. So when we have jing, we will have movement. That's when we feel movement of energy inside our body. It's actually not really the qi, it's the jing that is moving. If we want to get pedantic about it and kind of split up these terms. And then when we have heat, that is the jing refining into qi. Right? So to get to movement is foundation practice. We're working on foundation to get the movement of the jing. So movement is the completion of the foundation practice. And then heat that develops. So once you get this movement of jing and you start focusing on it, applying techniques to work it, then you'll get some heat, warmth, and then heat that is refining jing into qi. And then when it starts brightening up, right? When we start brightening up the field, that is refining qi into shen. So that's another benchmark for the classic first stage foundation, second stage refining jing into qi, third stage refining qi into shen, and there's a fourth stage refining shen, entering the emptiness or the void. And then we have a fifth one as well. We separate the fourth one into emptiness, and then from emptiness to the Tao, returning to the Tao. Yeah, so there's some more benchmarks. So I hope these are helpful. You know, I hope you can take these and it'll give you a little more focus in your training for those of you who are practicing this. And I think it's always really important to be honest with ourselves and sincere and say, okay, where am I, right? What do I need to work on next? And what have I figured out already? You know, be honest with yourself there too. You know, pat yourself on the back when you get some accomplishments. But there's always more. There is always more. The only time there's no more is when we don't have a body anymore and we are 100% returned to the Tao. But until then, there's always more. There's always more. So just keep going. Keep going. Okay, thanks.